Hey everyone, welcome to the next edition of Tyranid Tactica. Today we are going to be covering list building basics with Tyranids in 9th edition of Warhammer 40,000. While Tyranids are widely viewed as a mid-tier faction, there's still many tricks in our army that can be utilized to bring home some wins for the hive mind. Where 9th edition is very objective based, you need to have a general game plan in mind when building your list. Regardless of playing competitive or not, you still want your list to perform well on the table, and hopefully at least execute some cool strategies if all else fails. So here are the main topics we're going to look at in this video. First, we will look at the hive fleets, then go over the entire Tyranid units, covering each force organization section, such as HQ, Elite, Troop, Fast Attack, Heavy Support, and so on. We're not going to go in full detail on each unit, but just generally cover the advantages and disadvantages and how to build your list around these units. And then lastly, we're going to talk about planning for objectives. Alright, so let's dive into an overview of each hive fleet. So we're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses for each fleet and generally what you should build around if you choose this hive fleet. So the first one we'll look at is Behemoth. This fleet is strong for melee focused armies. It benefits deep striking and strategic reserve units in that you can reroll your charge distance, which is crucial if you're planning on using things such as hive tyrants dropping in, potentially raveners, or even a Trigon coming in. The psychic power also adds some nice hitting power. Now the one thing with Behemoth, it's really only ideal for melee builds. Next we're going to look at JORMUNGER. It's strong for shooting based armies. Definitely has some strong synergy around warrior-centric armies, being that warriors, when in cover with the stratagem, plus using the dynamic camouflage adaptive physiology, they can be rolling around with a 2-up save, and then also have the strat to -1 damage, so it makes them incredibly durable. JORMUNGER is also good for builds around Carnifexes. So if you like to go heavy Carnifex, and in my opinion Carnifex is a unit that you go all or nothing on, JORMUNGER keeps them alive. Now let's talk about the disadvantages. There's no support for melee builds, being that if you charge, advance, or do anything like that, you lose your hive fleet adaptation bonus, hive fleet bonus, or whatever. So really, if you're building around, let's say, Genestealers, you've got Raveners, you got Hormagaunts, that sort of thing, not really the best option. However, say for Hormagaunts, it could provide some support until you got them into place, sort of thing. But again, it favors more shooting armies in my experience. The other thing is its durability is more or less comparable to Leviathan. In my opinion, I prefer Leviathan over JORMUNGER, but again, it comes down to your particular build. Now, the next one is KRAKEN, which is the speed-focused hive fleet. So honestly, when it comes down to it, KRAKEN has unrivaled speed compared to almost most other armies out there. It's one of the fastest forms of getting around the board, especially having a strong stratagem that allows you to double your advance roll. Combining this with Genestealers, which are the ideal build when going KRAKEN. So if you plan on using Genestealers, KRAKEN is the go-to. KRAKEN also is great because you can use this stratagem, opportunistic advance, trying to remember all the different stratagems. You can use opportunistic advance to double your charge move, or your advance move, and then you still have metabolic overdrive in your back pocket as well. Now I know this one won't let you charge after using it, but being that this edition is objective based, KRAKEN can really use some speed, and you got 2 stratagems that can allow for some quite extensive movement in the movement phase, so you can take objectives quite fast. The downside to KRAKEN is that it's really only ideal for melee builds or Genestealer builds when you really get down to it. So if you plan on using a lot of shooting, or you have models that focus more on that, then perhaps there's other builds that might be more ideal for the list you're intending to make. Comparing KRAKEN and Behemoth, where they are the 2 melee builds, again, it comes down to what your army is going to consist of. If you're going Genestealers, as I've mentioned a few times now, go KRAKEN. If your melee builds are more so around, say, hive tyrants with wings jumping around, even having melee Carnifexes and old one is, then Behemoth might be a better option, especially having that extra psychic power. You can do some extra damage, plus having the ability to reroll the charge rolls can save you a CP in that phase as well. So really, just you got to look at between the two of them what the central focus is of your list. Next, we'll move on to KRONOS, which is the shooting hive fleet. Benefits shooting armies the most with its ability to reroll hits. However, there's a downside we'll talk about shortly. It's really ideal for smaller detachments. If you go all in with KRONOS, the downside to this is, like I mentioned, 9th edition is all about objectives and movement. KRONOS, to benefit from the hive fleet bonus, you need to stay still. So again, to move around, you're not going to be getting any benefit with that. So in my opinion, you've probably heard the term the mandatory KRONOS detachment. I'll probably actually do a video specifically on that in the future after we actually build the list, which will be after this Tactica video. So KRONOS, very strong for smaller detachments. The psychic power really enhances the damage output from Exocrine and Hive Guard. Exocrine having the +1 to hit means exploding 6s on 5s with the psychic power. And with Hive Guard having the ability to double tap. A large unit with exploding 6s can put out quite a bit of damage. So continuing on to the last of the, I would say, stronger hive fleets. There's two that I'm going to just talk about very quickly, but the last of the stronger options is Leviathan. This is my personal favorite as the primary force I build. If I take two detachments, generally it's a Leviathan attachment alongside either a KRONOS or KRAKEN. Those are my personal favorites thus far. Leviathan right up is the most durable fleet, or debatably with JORMUNGER. Again, depends on the build you're going for. But having the ability to have Feel No Pain on 6+ is quite handy, especially with larger units like big blobs of warriors. 9 warriors are very hard to kill, especially when combining with enhanced resistance and Leviathan, and then plus the -1 damage. So great for having a large OBSEC unit. On a whole as well, it creates very strong OBSEC units. However, going into the downside of Leviathan, you don't have the speed bonus that you would get with KRAKEN. The psychic power isn't the best when compared to some of the other hive fleet options, and it requires more synapse in your army. So when playing Leviathan, you need to kind of plan out how you're going to position your units and where your synapse models are going to be placed around. I like going with NEUROTHROPES, Warriors, and ZOANTHROPES in most of my Leviathan builds, being that ZOANTHROPES are very hard to kill already, plus adding on that 6+, it can help keep them alive a little bit more, and they still have some decent offensive power. And then they can kind of float around near some gaunts or whatever needs to be done. Leviathan as well is also ideal for the Gantt carpet build. Now talking about very quickly about the two hive fleets that we do not see overly much is GORGON and HYDRA. And in my opinion, I mean, there's going to be different opinions based on this. Again, if you watched the previous video, it all comes down to your local meta. So, talking about GORGON, the thing I don't like about this fleet, it's made for melee, but it lacks speed compared to the other fleets. So, it's going to be harder to get to the opponent. So during that time that you're, say, taking an extra turn to hit combat, you can get shot up quite easily, whereas KRAKEN is much faster. Then looking at HYDRA, it's built around swarm armies, but in my opinion, the high fleet bonus isn't that effective. It allows you to reroll hits if your unit outnumbers the target unit, but on a whole, it's just Leviathan offers more durability for the swarm units when compared to this. So it really, I don't think you see these two hive fleets an overly lot based on the reasons I mentioned. However, in the end, you play what you like, and it all comes down to your local meta. If you'll have success with these two fleets, all the power to you, but just keep in mind that there are stronger options that will meet your needs if those are the style of builds you're going for. Now, there are custom hive fleets. There are too many traits to really go over in this video, where I just want to cover the overall list building mechanics when looking at Tyranids. I'll cover the details of the custom fleets in a future video. I also haven't overly played with custom fleets, and one thing when I make these videos, I like to speak from a solid amount of experience, so I could talk about the benefits of all these different traits just looking at it on paper, but until I've played them out, I would like to wait until then so I can give you a first-hand experience on that. So those are all the things to think about with each HIVE fleet. As I've mentioned, there are strengths and weaknesses with each. You need to decide what your build is going to center around. Are you, again, looking for melee? Then KRAKEN or Behemoth will be your choice. Are you going more of a shooty army, potentially using JORMUNGER, not so much on the melee? Then you also have KRONOS as well to help support any of these other fleets if you are looking for a strong shooting group. And then there's Leviathan if you're just looking for durability, stay on those objectives. That is an option as well. It's personally my favorite. I've had a lot of fun with Leviathan. So now, with all that in mind, we're going to talk about each of the FOC slots and then cover most of the units. I don't own all the Tyranid models, so I mean, I'll have to speak mostly on the ones I have, but on a whole, it'll give you a general idea of the core units that you see most often in Tyranid lists. So let's jump into it, starting out with the HQ slot. Okay, so before we get into it, I just want to mention that we're not going to cover in-depth stats and uses for each unit specifically. We're just going to cover the advantages and disadvantages of each unit and things that you need to think about when building your list. So let's get into it. First off is the HIVE Tyrant. The HIVE Tyrant is great because it has multiple different loadouts that you can use. If you're looking for speed, the Winged HIVE Tyrant is the way to go, with strong melee and shooting options, which makes it very versatile. The one downside to that is it can be harder to hide, but with the new terrain rules, I've had quite a bit of success with my flying HIVE Tyrants. Now, the one thing with them is they are more expensive, which we'll get into just shortly. If you're looking for a durable synapse unit that will stay alive and support your fleet, a walking HIVE Tyrant is the way to go. Again, think about what fleet you're going to use before you choose your loadout for the HIVE Tyrant. Now the disadvantage. As I mentioned just a few seconds ago, the HIVE Tyrant can be expensive. If you're building your list around lots of objective holders that can hold objectives and prevent your opponent from taking them, such as lots of termagants, warriors, and so on, then the points could be better spent elsewhere over a Tyrant. However, if you're looking for a strong unit that can hit hard, jump around the board, and utilize some stratagems such as overrun to zip around, the HIVE Tyrant is a great option. Again, just think about what you're going to be building your list around and go from there. Next is the Malanthrope. The Malanthrope, in my opinion, is a strong HQ option as it is a character, gives a -1 hit bubble with 3 inches, which makes it a great candidate over the Venomthropes, as it is harder to take the Malanthrope where it is a character, and it protects the monsters even if it compares to the Venomthropes who lose a model and they don't get that benefit. The one disadvantage with the Malanthrope is it doesn't do a whole lot outside of the bubble that it provides, but again, it is a synapse creature that can hide amongst blobs, so it is quite advantageous to use it to that effect. But if you're looking for more of an offensive output with your HQ option, there are better choices. But the Malanthrope, in my opinion, is a strong option for adding durability to your list, especially where this edition is very objective-based. Next is the Swarmlord. The Swarmlord, in my opinion, can fit into a wide variety of lists, depending on what you're going for. Right up front, he's well known for the KRAKEN Genestealer build, and works strong with melee units. On a whole, he's not insanely durable, but if you're building a list, again, with Genestealers, you can use them as kind of a distraction, and he can zip around while the Genestealers, whatever other unit, takes most of the pressure off of you. The Swarmlord is great for cleaning up, and also putting out some psychic output. The disadvantage with him, again, is he can be taken out quite easily, where he is a character with 10 plus wounds, so he can't hide quite as well. His profile isn't overly huge, so terrain is a strong friend to the Swarmlord. He has a lot of points, so you need to really think about the role that he's going to use. I find Swarmlord's not a unit that you throw into a list and just think, oh, I'll just throw him forward. You really need to have the specific role for him identified if you're going to build around the Swarmlord. Obviously, melee-centric HIVE fleets work best with him. Next is a Broodlord. Now you might think, well, if I'm running Genestealers, the Broodlord's the way to go. The one thing I want to mention with him is he can be quite effective in lists that don't include Genestealers. We'll get into that shortly. So the Broodlord is fast, has the ability to use psychic powers, and is a character that can hide. So those are some great advantages. Obviously, if you're choosing to run Kraken Stealers, he'll fit in nicely there. Now, as I just talked about him being used without Genestealers, the Broodlord's a great candidate for babysitting with the KRONOS patrol detachment. You heard me mention this earlier in the video when talking about the KRONOS Hive fleet. Normally a Neurothrope would be used to babysit the exocrine Hive Guard that you would see in this detachment. However, with the Broodlord, you still have the psychic output, plus a little bit of offensive ability as well. He's also a lot faster than the Neurothrope, so late game objective grabbing, if he's still alive, is also an option. He has more points than the Neurothrope, but in my opinion, it's a great candidate for an HQ slot, depending on the build you're going to do. But really, he kind of fits into either shooting or melee builds. So very flexible. The Broodlord gets a thumbs up in my opinion. So consider him when you're trying to build a lot of your lists, because he can be very flexible. Next is Old One Eye. Old One Eye, in my opinion, fits best into Behemoth builds, being that it gives him a ton of boost for his hitting power with the Behemoth psychic power, plus being able to reroll the charge distance is crucial. I've used him in Kraken, and I find that Old One Eye does well there, but he's very reliant on the onslaught power going off. So if it doesn't go off, he can kind of be stranded in the open. The advantage with Old One Eye as well is he's a character under 10 wounds, so he can also be hidden around lots of other units. So most people think Old One Eye needs to be built around Carnifex lists, which isn't the case. He can hide amongst large blobs of gaunts and kind of sneak his way over to smashing different opponents. So this is a strategy that can be used to get someone across the table who hits hard without much fear of him taking damage. So consider this when choosing Old One Eye into your list. Don't focus on only Carnifexes, as he is a little flexible on what he can bring to your army. Now we have the Neurothrope. The Neurothrope, in my opinion, is the go-to HQ for the vast majority of my list. Regardless of what you're doing, the Neurothrope is great because it has decent psychic output, is a character which can hide, and the profile of the model actually is quite thin, so it is very easy to hide the Neurothrope away and have it float around as need be, or hide amongst your different units. The Neurothrope as well obviously buffs Zoanthropes, which if you've watched any of our reports are definitely a fan favorite of mine. I include them in quite a few of my lists, thus the Neurothrope does make a fair amount of appearances. The Neurothrope is great because it can fit into melee and shooting builds, being that it can use psychic powers to assist whichever type of force you're looking at. It is relatively cheap as well. So if you're considering a cheaper option and then wanting lots of points to spend elsewhere in your army, the Neurothrope is a great choice. Now for the TERVIGON. As much as I want to love this model, it is, in my opinion, right up front, very expensive and doesn't bring a whole lot of punch to the table. It is a character, but it's over 10 wounds, so it is targetable, even with a swarm around it, and also is a large monster, so it makes it a little bit harder to hide. Again, the new terrain rolls kind of help with this, depending on the table you have, but on a whole, it needs to stay near the gaunts that it's resupplying. So really, TERMAGANT builds work best with the TERVIGON, even though in match play you have to save reinforcement points to spawn gaunts. You can resupply larger units. So I've played games with the TERVIGON resupplying larger OBSEC gaunt units sitting on objectives that kind of floated between them, tossing out Catalyst and smiting as need be. In my opinion, the points can be better spent elsewhere, but this comes down to your local meta and how tough the lists you're going to be facing. If you have the model, though, I encourage you to give it a go. It's a lot of fun and adds a little bit of a challenge to it, even though the NIDs at times can be challenging to play to begin with. But hopefully this unit gets a boost. 100% honest, I think the points can be better spent elsewhere to make a more effective list. But that is just my opinion and experience with the TERVIGON. Moving on, we now have the last HQ unit that we're going to talk about, and that is the Tyranid Prime. The Tyranid Prime is the cheapest HQ choice that you can take. So talking about the advantages, that is the first one of this unit. The second advantage being that it buffs warrior units. So if you're going for a warrior-centric build, such as a large blob of warriors with death spitters and venom cannons, having the BS3 is huge. In my experience, it has been the make or break with shooting with my warriors quite a bit, and I do recommend considering a Prime when building lists like this. Outside of that though, the Prime doesn't have a whole lot of damage output. The points that you would spend on that, in my opinion, while they aren't a lot, can be better put into making your OBSEC units a little bit larger, and so on. Alright, that sums up the HQ slots. So now let's talk about the elite section. I do want to mention I do not have a MALECEPTOR model, but I will talk about the uses for the MALECEPTOR here anyway. So let's begin. First unit on the list is VENOMTHROPES. VENOMTHROPES are great because they offer a -1 hit bubble for your units. The VENOMTHROPES, in my opinion, are very nice for this, as they have a fair amount of wounds and they can be spread out to really create a lot of space that can be used to negate shooting armies. In my opinion though, the points, they can be better spent on other elite units. However, they do have an advantage when being included in armies that focus on survivability, again, such as JORMUNGER or LEVIATHAN. So getting that -1 hit is very beneficial, but they are not characters and can be targeted and killed quite easily. So they're good, but in my opinion, where objectives are important and we don't have a lot of things that are super good at killing, points can be better spent elsewhere. But if you're looking for survivability, give the VENOMTHROPES a thought. Next is the ZOANTHROPE. As I mentioned earlier when talking about the NEUROTHROPES, these ZOANTHROPES are a huge favorite of mine. I've had a lot of success using ZOANTHROPES. I'm a big fan of what they bring to the table in terms of survivability and damage output. Especially when combined with Leviathan, they are great for holding objectives. They're hard to take off objectives and kill. Running larger units, they do have a lot of damage potential when combined with a NEUROTHROPE. So if you're looking for survivability and decent damage output, these ZOANTHROPES are a good consideration. Next is the HIVE Guard. The HIVE Guard for a lot of people are an auto-include in list, being that they don't need line of sight to shoot. And with the double tap strat, they are quite effective. Now, in my opinion, HIVE Guard are most effective in units of 4 or more, but again, this comes down to what you're going to be facing off against. Having units of 4 or more is quite an expensive investment, but in my experience thus far, they do return your investment. So points well spent here. Obviously, in a KRONOS attachment, HIVE Guard are most effective, but outside of a KRONOS attachment, larger units is what you would need to get their value out of them, where the other fleets don't have an advantage to shooting. Next is the Lictor. The Lictor has been heavily overlooked for many editions, and rightfully so, due to its poor stat line and very weak hitting power. However, this edition focuses on objectives, and the Lictor has quickly become one of my go-to units when setting up my army. So later we're going to talk about building your army around objectives, and the Lictor is going to be a heavily discussed unit in that section, solely for the fact that the Lictor can pop up and is a small unit and it's hard to deny. And being an infantry unit, it can throw down deploy scramblers. So for a very small point investment of, I think, 37 points for the Lictor, right around there, I could be wrong on the exact number, but it almost guarantees you getting deploy scramblers. So for a small point investment, you're going to be taking home quite a bit of victory points. The Lictor for me in a lot of my lists, especially when trying to build more competitive builds, has been a no-brainer. So if you're looking for something that can guarantee you some points on the table while not taking too much up of your army, consider the Lictor. Next is DEATHLEAPER. On a whole, I don't think there's a whole lot of advantages, especially where this edition again is focused on scoring objective points. The DEATHLEAPER can not live up to the Lictor when you compare the points. The Lictor does everything the DEATHLEAPER can do, and much better for a fraction of the cost. So in my opinion, not a whole lot of advantage to DEATHLEAPER outside of playing friendly matches. Next is the HARUSPEX. This is a unit I desperately want to love, but I have struggled with this unit in the past. It is a hefty points investment for what it brings to the table. It is best combined with Behemoth, adding some hitting power to it, as it needs to kill things with its jaws to get more attacks with its shoveling claws. The hard thing with this, especially facing off against a lot of Primaris armies, is that you can't guarantee the kill, as it has to kill models to get additional attacks. So HARUSPEX is a fun unit to use. If you're building your list around having a strong melee hitter, consider combining the HARUSPEX with SWARMLORD to help get him across the table. That's another issue that the HARUSPEX has, is getting into position without getting shot to pieces. So it is a fun unit to use. Success can be had with it, but again, you need to build your army around the HARUSPEX, which isn't always the best unit to do that for, but it is a lot of fun when it works. Lastly is the MALECEPTOR. I don't have this unit yet, but I've watched a fair amount of battle reports and read a lot of discussion about the unit. On a whole, the MALECEPTOR fills a beefed up zoanthrope role with a moderately okay hitting power in close combat. Not the best, but it can hold its own type thing. But the big advantage with that is it can give out an aura to -1 damage to units around it. So again, building durability lists, especially combined with, say, warriors with enhanced resistance and Leviathan, it can make for some tough units to crack. Again, it is a heavy points investment, but if you're considering a unit for durability with some okay psychic output, definitely consider the MALECEPTOR. Now, I don't have the model for this as well, is the PYROVORE. The PYROVORE, it kind of has a little bit of a place in the army where strategic reserves can be used. Again, where I don't own the model, I don't have a lot of playing experience with it, and I haven't seen it in a whole lot of battle reports. I really don't like talking about units or giving advice for things that I have limited to no experience with, either with myself or watching other people use it. But generally speaking, the role that I would seek for the PYROVORE is to come in from strategic reserves to flame some things, or potentially have it come in with the Lictor. So come in, kind of protect the Lictor a little bit, maybe clear off a MSU unit for the Lictor to throw down its scramblers and then proceed to jump on the objective the next turn, where Lictors are kind of fast. But that's really all I can add about the PYROVORE. Next up, we're going to move into the troops section, which is quite arguably the most important slot in the Tyranid army right now. Being that 9th edition, you're going to hear me say this over and over again, because we want to make sure everyone understands it, is an edition that favors objective-based armies. So you can bring a list that doesn't focus on killing it all and still take home the win if you build and play the list correctly. So that is crucial to mention, especially when considering the troops choices for Tyranids. So let's take a look. First up is the Warrior. The Warrior has been long overlooked in previous editions, being that it was too easy to kill and the points could easily be spent better elsewhere. However, now with some adaptive physiology help, and being that Warriors are objective secured, they bring quite a lot to the table in terms of, I'd say, average hitting power in close combat and shooting when kitted out properly, and larger units are definitely going to be a tough nut to crack. Being that they also have a -1 damage stratagem, the Warriors are very survivable when combined with the right HIVE fleet, especially JORMUNGER and Leviathan. So if you're looking for a strong troops choice to have on the table, definitely consider the Warriors. I recommend, though, building in larger units. Units of, say, 5 to 9 is been the size that I've had the most success with. Being that their synapse is another bonus to them as well. You don't necessarily need a prime in the list, but it depends on the role that you want them to fulfill. If you're going to spend the points on venom cannons and death spitters to give them some hitting power, then I would say a prime is a good option to include in your list. So that's some things to think about when running Warriors. Genestealers. Not a whole lot to say about these. They, point for point, for a long time they were the best troops option in the entire game for what they could do. However, their points have gone up into 9th edition, which hasn't made them unusable, but it has definitely reduced their effectiveness on the table, being that they cost more and take up a greater percentage of the army compared to the previous edition. They still hit like a brick when combined with the KRAKEN HIVE fleet. However, they are a bit of a glass cannon, so keep that in mind when running them. I've played a few games now, and I've had some success with them. I've also had a few struggles, so you really need to understand movement as well when playing Genestealers. So it's a very technical unit to include in your army, which is something to think about. We'll go over this perhaps in a later Tactica video. Next is the HORMAGAUNT. The HORMAGAUNT has been kind of overlooked myself. I don't have a large number of them right up front. I think I only have about 25 or 20. Yeah, about 25 of them. I'm definitely looking to get more. Being that they never used to have a whole lot of hitting power. However, they are being included in more and more of the lists that I'm creating, being that they are fast, much like Genestealers, and are objective secured. So I don't need to send them right at my opponent to get my value out of them, and they're cheaper than Genestealers. So they definitely have a place in an army. So when bringing Hormagaunts, consider that they can move fast, get objectives quickly for you, and in larger numbers they can hit the enemy quite well. But in my opinion, that's not the role that you want to be using Hormagaunts for. Next is the Humble Termagant. Not going to do a whole lot on the table in terms of damage output, but these guys are one of our cheaper objective secured options and can come in quite large numbers as well. So generally, if I'm bringing Termagants, I like to include multiple units of them, just for a little bit of redundancy on the table. But again, where they are objective secured, it's great to send them forward. Where they have a smaller profile, they can hide a little bit as well. So if you're not into taking warriors and you're not looking for the speed of the Genestealer Hormagaunt, the Termagants, in my opinion, are the go-to. Now for the Rippers. Rippers are great because they can pop up around the table. They're small, they're easy to hide, and they are objective secured. The disadvantage with Rippers is they can't perform a few actions that require infantry to perform them, where they are not infantry. They do not have that keyword. So keep this in mind. If you're looking for troops choices to perform actions as well as hold objectives, the Termagants are a better option when you look at just points for points cost. And the Rippers do have their place, though, as a cheap troops option to fill out different detachments. Again, going back to that KRONOS patrol, they also synergize well with the KRONOS stratagem, which helps deny psychic power. So having them pop up can be quite advantageous for that. And that ends the troops section. All right, let's talk about the fast attack options for Tyranids. Now again, I don't have all the models for the fast attack slot. I don't have Shrikes, and I also don't have the Dimikarian. And I haven't really seen him a whole lot, so in this video, unfortunately, I'm not going to have a whole lot of input for that. I'd prefer to talk about units that I do have tabletop experience with, as I feel more confident about the advice and suggestions that I'm going to give. So for the Dimikarian, you'll have to look elsewhere, and same for the Shrikes. I'll give them quickly my thoughts here on the Shrikes before we get into the fast attack. I think they're great. They're comparable to Raveners. The downside is they don't have the deep strike ability that the Raveners have. And while the Shrikes are Synapse, I feel that if you're looking for a Synapse creature like that, I think the points are better spent on warriors, in my opinion. I don't know. Again, I haven't used them, so I don't know. Just looking at it, that would be my initial thoughts when considering the Shrikes. All right, so let's talk about the Raveners. Raveners are an interesting unit. They have found a place in a few of my lists. The role that I generally see them as is a multi-wound unit that can move very fast. They have the ability to deep strike, but I use them more as a distraction unit, more or less, to push forward, grab objectives quickly if I need it, depending on my secondaries or where the primaries are placed on the table. They have decent hitting power in close combat. However, they really are only good for taking out like MSU enemy units that are holding objectives. So they're good for clearing off, like, say, a scout squad or a tactical squad that's sitting on a backfield objective, things like that. Or they're also decent for tying up units. Again, they're advantageous in melee focused hive fleets like Behemoth and KRAKEN. The downside to that, though, is that you need Onslaught when referring to KRAKEN to really utilize the speed of that hive fleet. They're also great for Leviathan and The only thing with that is you do need synapse around them, so where they zip ahead quite far, they can get away from some synapse creatures. However, depending on how you're going to build the list, maybe if there's a Tyrant accompanying them, or maybe there's a Trigon Prime coming up with them, you can kind of get around that. Next is the MUCOLIDS. I haven't really used them a whole lot. They function similarly to a Spore Mines, which is why I'm going to talk about them. The role on the table is movement denial, and I guess we'll go into talking about the Spore Mines here as well. So the whole point with Spore Mines is to really tunnel your opponent away from locations on the table. I mean, they can shoot them, but that's one less thing that's going to be shooting at you if you place it properly. So if you set it near like a unit with excuse me, with heavy weapons, having some of those heavy weapons shoot at the Spore Mine over your other units on the table it would work out quite well. That's really the only role they fulfill. I haven't used them a whole lot. It's only been a couple games, but if you're looking for movement denial, that's the way to go. Next is the Gargoyle. The Gargoyle, it's a unit that I find what it does is perform better by other units in our army, and other units that have more advantages over the Gargoyle. First off being the HORMAGAUNT. HORMAGAUNTs are a little bit slower, but for the points, they get objectives secured, which I think is a huge advantage over the Gargoyles. The Gargoyles don't have a whole lot of hitting power. They move fast, but they also die quick. So I haven't used them a whole lot. It's just, again, you need to think about the role of the army that, or the role they're going to have with the army that you're building. If you're looking for like a faster screening unit, Gargoyles will work, but generally speaking, they're going to slow down most capable opponents. But there's something I'm going to try out more and more as I work through getting experience with different units in the Tyranid army. And again, with the Dimicarian as well, I don't have any experience with that model. I haven't seen it a whole lot in 9th edition, so I don't have a lot to add, unfortunately, about that particular unit in the fast attack slot. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the hotly contested heavy support slot. A lot of strong units in here that can fulfill quite a variety of roles on the table. First up is the Trigon and Trigon Prime. Now, I'm also going to talk about the Moloch in this section, as I don't have an actual Moloch model. I just have this Trigon. It was actually the first monster that I ever got when I started Tyranids. I modeled it as a Trigon at the time. I like that model a bit more before even really knowing about the rules. But I do plan on getting a Moloch model. That way I can run a couple of them. Anyway, going back to the initial unit that we're discussing here in the Trigon and the Trigon Prime. In my opinion, the Trigon and the Trigon Prime are too overpriced for what they bring to the table. If you're looking for a hard-hitting melee unit, they can hit hard, but they are very easy to kill, being that they only are toughness 6 with a 3-up save. They are very squishy when you're thinking about how much points you're spending, and they can come up from deep strike and get into your opponent's backfield, but again, they need a decent charge to get there. There is some way around it. You could use the Arachnocyte Gland, but in my opinion, depending on your army build, there's a few other relics that I would choose, and I'm not a huge fan of spending a ton of CP on additional relics, being that I'm already spending on the additional adaptive physiology, generally speaking, in most of my lists. So if you really, really want a melee-centered monster build, though, the Trigon Prime is a good one to consider. Well, actually, I'd say the Trigon Prime is a good one when considering a Leviathan build, being that it's Synapse and has the built-in 6++. And then just the Trigon, I think, is better fit into a Behemoth build, being that it can come out of Deep Strike and then reroll its charge distance, especially when combined with the Arachnocyte Gland. Now, the Moloch. The Moloch, at first glance, it has the potential to do a few mortal wounds when it comes up, and then it just kind of sits there. However, I've noticed the Moloch coming into more and more lists. I've used it a couple times now, and the big thing with the Moloch is it's just a giant distraction that is sitting in your opponent's backfield that you do have to deal with it. It's there. It's going to be a pest if not. So it does have the ability to burrow back, but it's for points as well. I believe it's one of the cheapest of our monsters when comparing for wounds with the toughness value with it. So it is a decent unit that you can include. If you're looking for a distraction unit, then the Moloch is the way to go. Next is the Tyranofex. The Tyranofex is a very strong shooting unit that we have. I'm a big fan of the acid spray, being that you can fire twice if it gets positioned, and also where it is an assault weapon, the Tyranofex can move in advance and get into very good position, get a shot off, then once it's all set up, start shooting this into the next turn. The great thing with the acid spray as well is it can be used to shoot that with any units that lock it up. So if anything gets to it, locks it in combat, and doesn't kill it, you best believe the Tyranofex is going to be hitting quite hard with shooting in the next turn as well. Combining that with the pathogenic slime stratagem, getting that extra damage. So the points cost is quite heavy for the Tyranofex, but is a good investment. So if your list is looking for some hitting power with shooting, definitely consider the Tyranofex. When combined with the Dermic Symbiosis adaptive physiology, it does add a lot of survivability. A few units that I synergize with the Tyranofex would be a Malanthrope to -1 to hit with it, and it makes a very hard unit to clear off of the table. Get that to the midfield and your opponent will more than likely be a little bit annoyed with having to deal with it. Next up is the Exocrine. The Exocrine is the go-to shooting option for almost all Tyranid lists, especially when using a KRONOS patrol, the mandatory KRONOS patrol, as you've heard me mention several times in this video. So if you're looking for a unit that can deal a ton of damage, don't ever overlook the Exocrine, especially with KRONOS Psychic Power Symbiostorm. Quite a lot of damage can be put out from the Exocrine, and with the strategic reserves ability that everyone now has access to, the Exocrine can come in and just dish out a lot of firepower from any angle, so it makes hiding from it quite difficult depending on the table that you're playing on. Next up is the Carnifex. There's quite a few builds with the Carnifex. I've played with a lot of different styles of Carnifex throughout 9th edition. A fair amount of games under my belt with them in the list, and on a whole, I am not overly satisfied for what they do or bring to the table. I found them to be very underwhelming myself. The points investment with them is not a lot, but I find you need a lot of Carnifexes to really maximize their output. It's a unit that, in my opinion, you have to go all or nothing on. They can be quite expensive if you kit them out heavily, but the points can be better spent elsewhere, in my opinion. So if you're going to go with a Carnifex build, there's a lot of different numbers that people recommend as a minimum amount of Carnifex to include, but I would say maybe go with 6 of them. Lots of Carnifex, can kit them all out, DACA, and then you can dish out a ton of firepower. Or if they go all melee, you can send them right across the table, and you'll probably lose a few on the way depending on what support you have around them, but once they get there, they do hit like a brick. So just one thing to think about. Next is the Humble BEHEMOTH. The BEHEMOTH is, in many people's opinion, overcosted for what it does. It is a unique unit in that you're bringing it not so much for its damage output, but much more so for the movement denial. I almost use my BEHEMOTHs in such a way, I move them in such a way that they are disadvantaged when firing because I want to miss. So if you're looking again for units that can really box your opponent in and make it difficult for them to move, or just become an annoyance to have to deal with them, consider the BEHEMOTH. I've used it many times to much success to block off vehicles from moving to get positioned to shoot at my monsters by having a spore mine land by them, block a certain lane so the vehicle can't move without coming in within an inch of the spore mine, thus forcing something to shoot it. So great for that. Great for that role. I do think you need to go all in with the BEHEMOTHs, which is a much larger point investment than a lot of people are willing to spend. But again, if the goal of your list is to work as a distraction, really force your opponent's hand type list, I certainly consider the BEHEMOTH. I think it's a great option for that. Another unit that I don't actually have the model for is the Toxicrene. So the Toxicrene, again, I don't have a lot of experience with it. I've seen a few reports with the Toxicrene. The Toxicrene is great for getting in your opponent's face and tying them up and keeping whatever you attack there. Having the stratagem to help keep the target unit in combat is quite helpful. But on a whole, in my opinion, the points that you're going to spend on the Toxicrene are definitely going to be spent elsewhere if you're looking for more of a melee monster build. But it is a fun unit to use, not to say that you shouldn't consider it, but also make sure it's comboed with the Hive fleet that is going to add some benefit to it, such as one of the melee fleets. Now we're going to quickly talk about flyers, the flyer section in the Tyranid Codex. I really haven't used the Hive Crone a whole lot, being that it is a hard unit to hide. I only have a Hive Crone, I don't have an Harpy. But generally speaking, the role to me is very clear for the flyers in our Codex. It is to get into the opponent's face, force them to deal with them, or have a monster, a kind of squishy monster, sitting in their backfield, targeting potentially their MSU OBSEC units or chipping away at their OBSEC units. So points wise though, I feel it can definitely be better invested into a lot of the other units we've already looked at. But again, if you're considering these units, be mindful of the role that they're going to fulfill. They're hard to hide, and having them sit around waiting to do something will more often than not get them killed before they actually bring any return to you on the table. Now, I also don't have any of the transport or in the fortification. I haven't seen them use a whole lot in 9th edition myself, at least the games that I've watched or read. So I don't have a whole lot of input on them. Again, I really like to offer my insights on things that I'm experienced with, rather than just give my suggestions based off the rules and my mindset of, oh, this should do that or shouldn't do that. So again, consider your local meta. I mean, everyone, if you're reading this and you have a Tyranid Codex, you're more than knowledgeable to know what they bring to the table, and you'll have to validate if it has a place in your list when considering all the other units in your army. I definitely plan on getting some Tyrannocytes in the future, and after I use them, perhaps I'll do a video dedicated to talking about their role and the list that can work around them. Alright, so that concludes talking about all the different units and the advantages and disadvantages and what style list they perform in. Very quickly now, we're going to talk about planning for objectives. Right up front, you need to really plan for objectives in 9th edition. I've said it several times in this videos, and I know I've said it in many of my other videos. 9th edition is all about holding objectives. Doesn't matter if you can't kill anything on the other table, if you can score the points, you'll take home the win. So when building your list with objectives in mind, you need to have some units that are going to be dedicated to holding the primary objectives. We'll talk about secondary shortly. So primary objectives, right off the bat, OBSEC units are key. So ensuring that you have a healthy dose of OBSEC units in your army will ensure that you can hold your objectives comfortably and not worry too much about your opponent taking them. You also need to have units that are fast enough to get across the table and survive and hold objectives too. Some units to think about for that, again, are warriors. Send them into the midfield. They're very tough to kill. They're OBSEC. Larger units will have a large number of models that can hold and contest objectives. HORMAGAUNTs are a fast option that you can use to zip around the table. GENESTEALERS as well, but they're a bit more of a point investment and generally will be targeted or used to attack something more so than holding objectives. So you need to think about your list as well, like what is going to hold the backfield objectives. Again, talking about that mandatory KRONOS attachment, as I've mentioned a whole lot of times in this video, it is quite handy to use that when you're building your list as not only the shooting portion of your list, but if you think about what else it brings to the table. When I bring in, I think of that not only as my shooting, but also my backfield primary objective holders. And depending on how many objectives are in my back to midfield, I can position that KRONOS attachment to stay close to one another to synergize, while also still holding my backfield objectives and send all of my OBSEC troops forward. Again, it depends on who you're playing against, which is what you need to think about. So that's my little blurb on primary objectives. You really do need to think about how you're going to hold them in the game, as they will get you wins. Killing stuff won't. Well, not necessarily. Choosing secondaries is also very important. I think on a whole, I'm sure there will be some debate to this, but I think at minimum you should have at least 2 secondaries built solely around your list. I'm still trying to kind of figure out a third one with most Tyranid lists that kind of works well. In my experience so far, the 2 no-brainer objectives have been deploy scramblers and engage on all fronts. Tyranids can move very fast when built properly. Most of my lists focus on units that can pop up around the board, especially again going back to lictors and rippers. For a very cheap point investment, you're almost guaranteeing yourself getting engage on all fronts, the max points with that each turn, and deploy scramblers is very easy to achieve when combined with a lictor and a termagant unit to ensure that you get that on all 3 turns. Another one to think about is Psychic Ritual. I know a lot of people are iffy on that or have mixed feelings. It can be quite effective. Our psychic powers are incredibly useful, and I do find that our psychers are more often than not really needing to pop off their psychic powers, but there are some strategies that you could use, perhaps taking a Neurothrope, sending it up the middle with a blob of gaunts. Generally there's a primary in the middle, but being that the Neurothrope is a character, it can be harder to take out of the blob of gaunts, and it can sit there getting Psychic Ritual, which is a significant number of victory points that you can take home. So you really do need to think about how your list is going to perform on the table. What objectives are you going to go for, because they're going to win you the game, and go from there. I mean, it's all fun in the end, like just throwing a list together of what you like. Again, when building a list, you need to decide what you're going for. If you're playing to win, and that doesn't necessarily mean playing super competitive, but obviously you want to perform well on the table. You should keep a lot of these considerations I mentioned in mind. But if you're playing for fun, obviously just bring what you want and enjoy the game and the hobby. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully you learned something new. In the next Tyranid Tactica video, we're going to be building a 1500 point list following the guidelines set in this video, so you'll hear a lot of things that I've mentioned in this video being talked about as I walk you through the mindset behind the list that we will create. If there's a particular hive fleet that you would like me to build around, leave a comment below, or else I'll just kind of pick and choose one and give my reasonings and thoughts behind it. Thank you so much for watching. I know it was a long video, but I really hope it helped newer players get a grasp on how to build Tyranids in 9th edition. And we will see you in the next video. Very excited to bring loads more battle reports and future Tactica videos. Thank you again for all your support.